Hello, everyone. This is Jasper of the Newton Public Schools Alumni Association, and today we have another special guest joining us. Today we have Barry. So, welcome, Barry. Hope you're doing well today. Would you mind giving us a quick introduction of who you are, when you graduated at Newton South, as well as what you're doing now?
Sure. My name's Barry Roos. As Jasper said, I graduated Newton South in 1981, and I currently own Roosites Web Development, which is a web design, development, and management firm here in Boston with offices in Foxborough and also Dunedin, Florida. When I graduated, I was probably one of the only students ever from Newton South to go to the University of Kentucky.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
as my interest at that time was horse racing, which I
Ooh,
went on to train racehorses for almost 20 years.
I
And
see.
what happened to me was one of my clients in the early days of the internet was a developer who built me a website for my racing business. So I was one of the first
Ooh.
in my industry, one of the first two people in the world to have a website. Now, like everything
Wow.
else back then, he was an Oracle database developer, and there weren't many people with his skills. So he would be headhunted all the time. So I won a couple of races. I said, "Hey, I want to put him on my website." He said, "I'm so busy. I don't even have time." I said, "What do I need to learn?" Not thinking it was going to be a career. He said, "Well, you need to learn HTML, JavaScript, and a whole bunch of other things," which was all foreign to me at the time. So I would go to the racetrack at Suffolk Downs in East Boston. I would train my horses. I would take a shower and I'd go to class at night. One thing led to another because there were no web designers and developers back then because it was a new industry. Everyone I knew in business from growing up in Newton and places that had a business needed a website. So they came to me. Um, I ended up going from that to spending 10 years at Fidelity Investments in Boston, doing web work and project management type stuff before going back out on my own in 2010. And since then, I've been out of racing because racing in New England doesn't exist anymore. And my kids were in school at the time. So the web stuff was a great second career for me. And now that's what I've been doing. So,
Wow, that's amazing. I think this is something that, for someone who doesn't know you, you're always going to win the two truths, one lie thing because almost
yeah.
no one's going to expect horse racing, I see.
No, and again, like I said, at the time in Newton South, when you would meet with your advisor to look at colleges, they had a book, and it was basically like old computer printouts, like this thick, and of all the kids that had ever graduated, where they went. And I think I was like the one of two in like
Oh,
50
wow.
years. Because why would you go to the University of Kentucky growing up in Massachusetts? Well, if
That's
you're
true.
interested in horse racing, that's the Ivy League.
Wow, that's amazing. So I guess, it seems like when you were exiting South and going into college, you already kind of had a good idea that, I wanted to do horse racing in college and as a career. So I guess, is there anything you did in South or anything that South gave you that maybe
Yeah.
inspired you to do that?
Sure. I think that at the time I was at Newton South, I believe we were the number one public high school in the United States. And it was so competitive. I think we had six kids early admissions to Harvard that year in my graduating class. And we had a tremendous class. And what
Wow.
it did was it was so competitive that even though I knew I was going in a different direction, that competitive spirit always drove me. And I really had like a real entrepreneurial, you know, um, to me, I always knew I wanted my own business. Now, I knew I wanted to get into horse racing, but I never knew it would somehow lead to web development.
Oh, yeah.
But definitely the competitive spirit of our class and stuff, and the entrepreneurial spirit was definitely something I always took with me. And, most of the people I graduated, went into business for themselves. And, so it definitely pushed me in that way.
I see. So it's mainly the competitive nature of your school at the time that kind of
Yeah,
pushed you into entrepreneurship. I
yeah,
see. Is there anything
exactly.
specific that maybe pushed you towards horse racing as compared to,
Sure.
any other
Uh,
business, I guess?
Yeah, my family had horses as a hobby when I was growing up. So
Oh, I see.
I would literally, back then, I don't know if Newton South still has open campus,
I
but
think it's a bit close now,
at
unfortunately.
the time it was open campus. So I could get done and go watch our horses run. So,
Wow.
so to me, that was something I always liked. So I knew I wanted to do something with that, and I thought I would do that for the rest of my life. But like I said, the one thing you always have to be open to is, and I tell this to kids
Right.
all the time, be open to new things. You think you're going to do
Hmm.
something for your whole life, and then something comes up. So the other day, as a matter of fact, I was talking to a young man, um, and he was saying, "Well, did you go to college to be a web developer?" And what I had to tell him was, when I went to college, there was no web.
Right. Yeah.
So, the web didn't come around till the mid 90s, basically. So I graduated in the early 80s.
Right. I
So,
see.
so that's what I said to him. You can never know, you always have
Hmm.
to keep your
That's
eyes
true.
open and be open to new experiences. Cause I think that's the biggest thing, is just to be open to things, because you never know which way your life's going to go.
I
And,
see.
even, you go to college thinking, okay, I'm going to college, I want to do this, but you might find something else. So,
Exactly. Yes. I see. So, you've had a very interesting switch from horse racing all the way to web development, and I'm pretty
yes.
sure the switch also required a bit of training, as you say. You have to go to
Yeah.
classes sometimes. So, talk
Yeah.
me through your switch from horse racing to web development. Like,
Sure.
obviously there were some information gaps to be filled in. So, how do you fill in these gaps?
So yeah, so for me, because the thing with horse racing is you start early in the morning, 4:30, 5 o'clock, and you
Oh,
get done training by 10:30. So once, if you don't have a horse racing yourself, and you don't race every day, you are basically done, by 12 o'clock. So you have
I
time to
see.
do things. So like I said, for me, I would go to the track, and then I would go to, school. And I went to a small computer training school in Copley Square. And at the time, when the web first came out, all of a sudden, all these little schools popped up that never existed, because it was a totally new thing.
Oh, I
So for
see.
me, it was nice because I was doing that on the side. So I wasn't totally dependent on it. And then it got to the point where that was my focus. And like I said, going to Fidelity
Right.
was a great experience, because I was pretty young still, and I had never worked any place except in a barn. So
I
I went to
see. Yeah.
Fidelity for what was supposed to be a 30-day contract, which led to 10 years. And what it did, though,
Oh,
it gave me experience with some of the best technology in the world. I think when I was at Fidelity, at the end, their technology budget was over $2 billion. It was crazy.
wow.
And we had the best of everything. So you worked with, I'm coming from, being a horse trainer. I would meet people, and I'll never forget. I meet people. Oh, where'd you go to school? Oh, MIT. Where'd you go? Kentucky. So it was always a fun,
Yeah.
conversation starter. How'd you end up going from horse training to being a web developer?
I
But
see. So that's a fascinating life experience. But you mentioned
yeah.
you worked at Fidelity, but now I'm looking at
Yes.
your Zoom background and I see Roos sites, and I look at your shirt and
Yes.
I also see Roos sites.
Yep.
So is that like a company of yours?
Yes. My company name is Roos Web Development.
I
So
see.
I was actually, after my meeting with you, I'm heading to a meeting. That's why I'm wearing my
Oh,
shirt.
I see. That's amazing. So when do you start your company, Roos sites?
I started my company way back in '96. Was
Oh,
my
wow.
first website I did, and have been doing it ever since.
And
So,
did you do it, I
started-
guess, along with Fidelity, or do you quit Fidelity to
yeah,
focus on
no,
this?
when I was at Fidelity, it's at one point I was actually training horses, had a web development company. I was working at Fidelity. I actually did all three for a very short time.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but the way Fidelity operates is that if you have another employment, any kind of side business, you have to disclose it. And
I
obviously, I
see.
wasn't doing web development for anybody in financial services that was in competition. So as long as that was, approved, you were okay.
I see.
But
So you're
yeah,
doing
I was doing
Fidelity and this right now.
yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So I guess what inspired you aside from the Newton South's entrepreneurial spirit. I guess when you were working at Fidelity, what kind of inspired you to now think I want to start my own web development site?
Yeah, well, I always kind of kept my thing going on the side, so I always kept a small thing going. I think again, it kind of goes back to that entrepreneurial spirit. that I kind of
Mm-hmm.
gained growing up in Newton and going to Newton South that, I always thought, even when I was at Fidelity, how can I do this, what I'm doing, but even better? So, for instance, a very simple example is we managed all the daily content for Fidelity, one of my jobs. And we had what's called a 10-day service level agreement. So if one of like the brokerage department said, hey, we want to update this website, we want to update our page on the site, we would say 10 business days. It's 10 business days, so that could be 12 days, obviously with weekends. And I always said to myself, some of these things I can do in 15 minutes. Why do I have to put, so
Oh,
I always knew
I
I could
see.
be more responsive, and again, you're talking about a company with 50,000 people, so it's not as, cut and dry, but on your
Hmm.
own, the one thing I always do is I respond to everybody the same day. When my clients come
Okay.
to me to add content or make changes, I respond the same day. And that was the thing I learned was, I can do this better. By being
Wow.
smaller, you're more agile.
So you saw an opportunity and you immediately seized it with your own company. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Wow, that's
Exactly.
amazing. So I guess, you've had the privilege of being one of our oldest members on this podcast, which also means that, compared to us measly high schoolers, you've had the most life experience and wisdom. So, a lot of us, we're kind of forced into the digital industry nowadays because of how prevalent it is. So,
Yep.
kind of with your wisdom and your added knowledge on such a long time in the basically the entire landscape, I guess, what is maybe one value or mindset that you feel has took you very, very far in life, all the way to the amazing position that you are now? And what is one thing that you maybe tell us high schoolers to keep in mind that can also bring us just as far as it brought you?
Yeah, well, I can tell you, and I've told this to my daughters as well. I said, there might be people who are smarter than you. There might be people, that, like I said, went to better schools than you. But the one thing they can't do is outwork you. You can never let
I
anybody
see.
outwork you. And, that was the biggest thing. And my daughter, now one of my oldest daughters, said, you know, I really learned from that. And because there's no excuse for anybody outworking you. And I got that, if funny enough, I got that from training horses. Because you
Wow.
train horses, you work 7 days a week. Because you don't have Sunday say, hey, sorry, you're not eating today or getting out of your stall. So you work 7 days a week, 4:30 in the morning, it's a hard business. So when I went to Fidelity, I'll never forget, when you do a big install for a company like Fidelity on the website, you do it at like 2 a.m., 1, 2 a.m.
Ooh.
You do it when, the traffic is low on the website. And so I'll never forget my first like time I was there, we had to, stay till like, 2 a.m. And then one day we had to work Saturdays, and people would be like, I'm not working on a Saturday. And I was like, I work 7 days a week my whole life. So,
Wow.
and then
Yeah.
that was the thing. Like, and my daughter has seen the same thing. Like, if you're willing to work harder than anybody else, you know,
Hmm. Yeah.
so
Definitely. I see. So who knew that, I guess, racing horses managed to
yeah,
give you such
yeah,
a life, I guess, a
yeah,
mindset that allow you to grind so hard, and I guess web
sure.
development that allow you to be brought so far. So I guess
Yeah,
hopefully everyone listening to this learned a whole lot from Barry. Barry is essentially a veteran of the web industry, and I personally learned a lot from him because, we're all going to be forced into this industry or interacting with it in some manner when we grow up.
sure.
So, once again, Barry, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you very much to
Yeah.
everyone for tuning in. I hope you learned something because I definitely have, and I will see you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasper.